today. My name is Nadine. My name is Nadine Spencer. I am the president and CEO of the Black Business and Professional Association. The BBPA and the Diversity Institute are pleased to bring an important topic into discussion: the value of equity, diversity, and inclusion in marketing and advertising. We want to thank all of you for joining us today to learn more about biases within the advertising strategies for adopting inclusive advertising practices. We also want to thank our event partners, Zulu Alpha Kilo and NABS, for co-leading today's webinar. For today's session, we will work through the following agenda. We'll tell you a little bit about us. We'll talk about the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the current state of advertising. We'll look at inclusive marketing, and then, of course, the solution, strategies for change, which we'll look at the Micropedia of Microaggressions, the Diversity Institute, and Zulu Alpha Kilo will lead that section, and also NABS resources. And then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. I also want you to know that today's recording and also the presentation will be available online at the Diversity Institute's website and our partners as well after today's session. So about us, the BBPA, the Black Business and Professional Association, we are an organization aimed at looking at addressing Canada's Black community's challenges. We look at equity and inclusion also. And how do we do that? We do that through our programs. We have programs that support business and professional excellence, development, economic, and education. We represent more than 20,000 Black-owned businesses, and I'm actually in Yellowknife right now. We're running programs for Black businesses across the country. We provide training and supports programs to support businesses and entrepreneurs and youth through our scholarship program. We're also a member of the Federation of African Canadian Economics, known as FACE, which is part of the Black Entrepreneurship Program. Our awesome partner, the Diversity Institute, they work to undertake research to advance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. They lead the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, Future Skills Center, and the 50/30 Challenge. They develop customized strategies, programming, and resources for diverse organizations, including Rogers Communications, Starbucks, Metrolinx, and others. They have 130 full-time research staff and 250 industry, community, and government partners. They're also named the UN Prime Best Practice. So let's talk about the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as addressing and eliminating systemic stereotypes, particularly in the advertising, is not only the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. I think it truly is the only thing to do. But we see positive benefits for organizations, both internally and externally, when they adapt efforts to promote EDI. So when we look at demographics in Canada, we see that they're changing. Racialized and Indigenous population, as well as the percentage of people living with disabilities, have grown and continue to grow across Canada. Further, a large part of the 2S LGBTQ plus population in Canada are youth ready to enter the labor market. So the logistic then flows that organizations that intentionally mitigate barriers for people in all their diversity to obtain roles within the company, and organizations that promote inclusive workplace cultures are better placed to attract and retain talent. You know, it's also important to note that consumer demographics are changing, and so are consumer preferences. Studies show that consumers may lean towards purchasing from companies that reflect their values. You know, in recent years in particular, we've also seen consumers are holding brands accountable for stereotyped advertising and branding. And, you know, either by speaking out or putting their money where their mouth is and shopping elsewhere. There's a big movement where individuals are really moving elsewhere when brands are not in alignment. So ultimately, we know that promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion and addressing stereotypes have positive impacts for organizations within the advertising industry. So what is the current state of advertising? Despite the positive benefits of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within the industry, we still see disparities that still persist internally within organizations in the Canadian industry. On the slide, you can see we have data from a survey conducted by the World Federation of Advertisers and Kantar of 10,000 respondents around the world, including 3,000 from the US and Canada. The study revealed strong evidence of a gender pay gap in Canada. Women make 5% less than men in executive and C-suite positions. This gap increased to 20% at a trainee and junior executive ranks. Respondents from ethnic minority groups make 10% less than white respondents at the executive management C-suite level. This gap increased 22% at the junior trainee level. So there's a sense of belonging and microaggressions. So let's look at that. So this same study highlights disparities in the senses of belonging within the advertising industry in Canada. 66% of ethnic minority respondents say they feel like they belong at their company compared to 78% of white respondents. And 27% of Canadian respondents agree that their company does not treat all employees equally, regardless of age. 28% of Canadian respondents and their company, they said their company treats all employees the same, regardless of family status. However, 12% of ethnic minority respondents report facing discrimination based on their racial backgrounds versus 2% of white respondents. A point of intersectionality, this same study revealed that in the industry in Canada, white women reported a sense of belonging of 76%, but this drops to 54% for Black women. So let's look at experiences and how experiences affect engagement. Patterns of inequality within the industry persists, according to a study of the Canadian Marketing Association. So according to the study of 498 respondents, 63% of respondents in companies with little leadership diversity report experiencing microaggressions. And further, among those without diversity in senior leadership, only 47% stated that their organization makes an excellent or very good effort to make employees feel welcome. On the other hand, among those with a well-diversified leadership, 87% of respondents felt that their organization makes them an excellent or very good effort to make employees feel welcome. So this statistical highlights the difference diversity can make in an organization. So when we look at perceptions of stereotyped advertising persist. So we've spoken about disparities that exist among those working in the space and concerns individuals have about stereotype ads themselves. And we all know that consumer expectations are shifting. So in Canada, the correlation between brand authenticity and overall trust has increased this past year. Authenticity contributes to consumers' likelihood of recommending the brand to others. And I see this a lot. US Microsoft study findings, 72% of respondents are likely to support brands with authentic advertising. And after viewing an ad deemed inclusive, purchase intent lifted, particularly for women, by over 26 points. So according to a global Salesforce study, 66% of consumer respondents have stopped buying from a company whose values didn't align with theirs. So look at the difference. This is up from 62% in 2020. So now that we have a better understanding of the context sorry, I'm moving a little bit to the side. So now that we have a better understanding of the context included in the current state of EDI within the Canadian advertising industry, current perceptions or of portrayals within ads and consumer expectations, we want to walk through inclusive marketing principles and strategies for mitigating biases within ads. On the slide, we see Salesforce inclusive marketing principles as well as additional principles. Principles include starting with tone, being intentional with language, and this we see a lot in the work that we do. The intention with language is so important. That's why, when we have marketing campaigns designed through a cultural perspective, it's so important. And then we also consider context. We also want to look at ensuring representation, avoiding appropriation, and that is key. We see a lot of backlash with brands that has cultural appropriation, and then also counter stereotyping. Additional principles include authenticity as a key driver, avoid woke washing and tokenism by ensuring EDI is prioritized internally, creative teams and leaders, and externally in ads, branding, and marketing. So when we look at principles, a crucial piece that impacts whether advertising is stereotyped or whether individuals in ads are empowered relates to the tone of the piece. Is it an informative one? Is it a somber tone, a light or happy tone? What is the overall messaging? When we look at, what is the overall messaging? What is being portrayed as a specific tone, and who is often being featured? Establishing the overall messaging is crucial for then identifying gaps and stereotypes in the ways in which individuals in print or on screen are framed. In regards to intention, and I think intentionality is so important with language, it is crucial to carefully consider every word, symbol, or phrase, and not just what the words say, but also how they're said, and most importantly, by who's saying these words. So when we consider tone and intention, think about lighthearted commercials. We often see promoting household cleaning products. A lighthearted commercial about a husband or wife where the husband is trying out the new dishwashing detergent may have the intention of being carefree, but many times these ads divulge into reproductions of gender roles and symbols, the nagging wife and the clueless husband, paying mind to intention and symbolism and how and why things are said is so important. So, we always want to ensure representation. So just, have a look at these images. Overarchingly, people want to see themselves reflected in the media. It helps them to feel all empowered, inspired, and heard. And this is what we hear a lot from equity-seeking individuals. They want to be seen. They want to be represented. And so before publishing and advertising, we want to ask, does it reflect society? Does my ad ensure to showcase a variety of different individuals engaging in different activities, and not just stereotypical activities either? Am I constantly showing people of one gender or one race and engaged in one activity or compared to another? Have I shown individuals in ways that respect their dignity? So we want to consider context. Coupled with this is considering the context. Many of us think of ads in the past few years that incited controversy or seemingly missing important cultural context, often related to gender or equality. My daughter today, she's an equestrian and she has a site called Black Equestrian, and she's doing a speech today, just like her mom, in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things she highlighted in her speech as I was listening with her yesterday is the stereotype that, Black individuals are not riders. And she's challenging that myth to show that, she's a Black woman and she's an equestrian. And so that industry should be open to showing the diversity within that space. So, so that's just a point I wanted to add. But, as we move forward, we talk about cultural appropriation. So we all want to promote diversity in the print and video media that we produce. However, it is important to realize that drawing from people's culture and traditions and personal experiences can both be subjective and very, very sensitive. Being mindful of nuance and historical context, honoring and learning the culture, seeking guidance and diverse opinions, evaluating content, intent, and impact, and evaluating authentic voices are crucial. The image on the slide, for example, portrays a brand's Bollywood theme promotion video featuring an all Malay cast. The ads was criticized online for appropriating Indian culture and not having any artists of Indian ethnicity in this video. The example is a reminder to advertisers to show individuals authentically and to cast appropriately. So when we look at counter stereotypes, many of us seen ads that play into harmful stereotypes. This is where marketers have the power to change the society around them. On the screen, we have a somewhat obvious example of body shaming stereotypes. Similar examples exist relating to ageism, messaging with underlying messaging on what is considered youthful, promoting products to stay youthful with subtle backhanded messaging against aging, etc. So here we can see two different examples of stereotypical commercials. In the first example, the ad promoting Nivea's line of men's skincare products features a neatly dressed Black man shedding his quote unquote unprofessional afro and beard with a caption, "Re-civilize yourself." If we think about the ways in which the Black community, and particularly Black men, are treated as threatening and unprofessional, we see why this ad is problematic and it plays into this harmful narrative. I think that when ads like this happens is because we don't have representation at the table. And this is why it's important that we have representation in these spaces. Because I imagine that if a Black person were at that table or someone else with more understanding, they would say, this is really not an appropriate ad. So as we move into the next slide, we want to be authentic and avoid tokenism and woke washing. Additionally, underpinning all efforts is the need for brands and organizations to be authentic and avoid woke washing, which is essentially disingenuously aligning with social causes to sell a product or promoting inclusion on the surface. A key example of lack of authenticity and woke washing comes from the Audi ad we've seen on the screen. The ad advocated for equal pay for women, but along with a lot of positive reactions, the automaker also dealt with a deluge of negative comments about the ad on social media. Many viewers pointing out that gender disparities, the gender disparities in the Audi's executive team. So, that's the other piece that's interesting is that, individuals are going to the websites and they're checking to ensure the authenticity in these campaigns. So I will move now to the example on slide 19, the Mercedes example, Mercedes-Benz and Gillette. We do want to offer some efforts that has been largely well received that combat woke washing. So here we see a very popular campaign that took place a few years ago in the US. We found from the reports from Mercedes that when asked their reasons for not majoring in STEM, young women often cite a lack of encouragement in role models. In 2019, 50,000 young girls across the United States engaged in programs to challenge gender stereotypes and research that shows can impact into decisions later in life. So Mercedes said that their goal is to inspire children to imagine all that they can be and can become and break down the gender stereotypes in the toy aisle with purpose-driven programs like this. Another example is Gillette's first shave ad, which depicts a father passing down his shaving to his transgender son as he proudly undertakes his first attempt at trimming his facial hair. This film sets out to tell the audience about shaving, along with the way that takes us through a narrative of acceptance, love, and vulnerability and awareness. The appropriate casting of Samson, The tone and the fact that Gillette partnered with the 517 in Toronto to support inclusive programming are great examples, good practices for ensuring authenticity. So when we look at strategies for change, we've shared examples gone wrong, as well as some good practices thus far. In addition to the tools for change, the Diversity Institute, Zulu Alpha Kilo, and NABS plan to share later on. We want to also offer some ways in which organizations in the industry can look both inwards and outwards to ensure representation and inclusion internally within ads. So when we look at leadership and governance, tone truly does start from the top. Starting with inclusive and diverse leadership, it is crucial for agencies and organizations to look around the decision-making table, who is present and who's left out. Leaders should be making a space for conversations related to inclusion, promoting these intentions internally and externally, and setting strategy that embeds EDI into the actions and goals of the company. An example of ways to set tone and show commitment is through the 50-30 challenge. We know that diversity at the decision-making table matters, and many of the statistics we shared previously highlight the positive benefits that diversity and leadership brings. The 50-30 challenge is a voluntary challenge developed by the Government of Canada with almost 1,900 signatories across Canada. It encourages organizations of all types and sizes to strive for gender parity and significant representation of equity-deserving groups on boards and in senior leadership positions, and provides organizations the tools and resources to do so. We encourage leaders within organizations to sign on and receive supports for ensuring diverse representation and inclusion within organizations, and particularly in leadership positions. For more information, including information on the challenge as well as tools, you can visit diconsulting.ca. Human resource actions are also critical for promoting EDI within organizations. Adopting strategies for inclusive hiring, particularly in creative teams, has an impact both internally and a trickle effect to hopefully ensuring that ads developed are more diverse and thoughtful. So looking at organizational culture within a company plays a large role in whether people feel valued and subsequently want to stay. And the Diversity Institute and Zulu Alpha Kilo will speak more on that shortly. Inclusive cultures can be fostered through the policies geared towards anti-harassment, EDI, and others, but they can also be fostered through the daily interactions we have with one another, and that promotes openness and respect. And my colleagues at Zulu will speak more on this. So in order to ensure both accountability and longevity of EDI efforts, it is important to measure and track progress and outcomes. This can be done through staff surveys, collecting demographic data, and others to identify gaps in representation, gaps in feelings of belonging and inclusion, and then monitor the successes of initiatives to address these gaps. Important for this industry is diversity and inclusion across the value chain, including procurement efforts, vendor selection, and product development, and of course, product marketing. We've gone over some do's and don'ts within the presentation, but overarchingly, good practices include ensuring that products are accessible, and subsequently, so is advertising. Including, closed captioning text and so forth. Ensuring that ads reflect people in all their diversity, and that portrayals are empowered ensuring representation within the creative process so that individuals in print and on screen are portrayed authentically, and coupling inclusive advertising practices where possible with meaning actions to uplift communities. So this brings me to my final point on uplifting communities. Part of the reason we see brands getting called out for woke washing is because they promote diversity outwardly, but the inner efforts don't match. Or because they claim to support a community through diverse advertising, but haven't made any effort to uplift that community in practice. It's really about walking the talk. There's a couple of things organizations can do in terms of outreach, namely expanding the pool of the next generation of diverse advertisers. This can be through internships, educational efforts, awareness, and networking opportunities. There's a lot of value in networking opportunities. Further, where possible, couple your efforts with inclusive advertising by giving back. This can be through donations, time volunteering, partnering on a program for change, etc. Ultimately, organizations are authentic when they support individuals in their organization to make strides to build a pool and support communities. So ultimately, we've seen what more is needed to truly foster inclusion within the industry itself and to ensure that ads in Canada represent people in all the diversity and portray them in authentic and empowering ways. I want to hand it over now to my colleagues at the Diversity Institute and to Zulu Alpha Kilo to talk about additional tangible tools for change, including tools for fostering an inclusive workplace culture and ensuring that ads are free from stereotypes. I'll pass it over now to Nancy Mitchell from the Diversity Institute and to Stephanie Young from Zulu Alpha Kilo to talk about the Micropedia of Microaggressions.
Great, thank you so much, Nadine. I will just share my screen. Oh. If you don't mind just stopping sharing your screen, and then I'll pull mine up. Okay, amazing, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so thank you so much. So my name is Nancy Mitchell. I'm part of the Diversity Institute, and I'm so pleased to be talking about some tools for change, namely the Micropedia of Microaggression, with my colleague Stephanie Young from Zulu Alpha Kilo. So through Nadine's presentation, and especially the data shared on perceptions and experiences of individuals working within the advertising industry in Canada, we really heard the need for promoting an inclusive workplace culture. We heard links between inclusion and attracting talent, as well as links between inclusion and retention in the workplace. We also heard the importance of ensuring inclusion on creative teams, as this really has an impact on how individuals in all of their diversity are authentically and progressively portrayed in print and in media, in video advertising, etc. But people often find this idea of fostering an inclusive workplace culture as something that's a little bit daunting, because it's hard to put your finger on exactly what that looks like and how to tangibly make that happen. But what I would say is it really boils down to the ways in which we speak to one another on a daily basis in the workplace, whether that's in person or virtually. So I'm talking about the compliments we give one another, the jokes we use, the phrases and the common sayings that we have, and sometimes the things we say to one another, whether intentional or not, really reveal our biases and can have a negative impact on individual relationships and also the overarching workplace environment. So that brings me to microaggressions. What are microaggressions? They're the everyday snubs and insults that individuals from marginalized or equity-deserving groups face. They're often subtle comments. They can also be actions, and they really reveal our implicit and unconscious biases or stereotypes. So this is a little bit broad, and sometimes when I'm thinking about microaggressions, I think it's helpful to break it down into the 3 subcategories. So the first one is microassaults. These are blatant verbal or nonverbal actions that convey discriminatory or biased sentiments. So an example of this would be like ignoring a woman or a racialized person at a counter. But if we're thinking about it in the workplace, perhaps this is ignoring a woman in a meeting, or intentionally conveying that you're invalidating her perspectives or the skills that she brings to the table. So the second subcategory is the micro insult. These are behaviors or verbal comments that convey rudeness, insensitivity, or demean a person based on their identity. So this is saying something like you're a credit to your race, or in the workplace, maybe conveying surprise at someone's professionalism or their ability to deliver an excellent presentation. And then the last one is the micro invalidation. So these are verbal comments or behaviors that exclude or dismiss the thoughts and feelings and realities of a particular group. So this can be something like, when I look at you, I don't see race. Or perhaps in the workplace when an individual is expressing an experience that happened to them or a concern, and then someone invalidates that experience. And I think ultimately, when we're aware of microaggressions and their impacts, we can be more intentional in avoiding them and then creating a workplace that's inclusive where people are able to bring their full and authentic selves to their job. So I will now hand it over to Stephanie from Zulu Alpha Kilo to talk a little bit about the Micropedia.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. We partnered with Nancy and her team at Diversity Institute, as well as Nadine, the Black Business and Professional Association, and the Canadian Congress on Inclusive Diversity and Workplace Equity and Pride at Work. And the reason why there were so many different partners in this is because I think, as Nadine had talked about, it's really important to bring people who are authentically experiencing these and their expertise and their voice to the table. And so similar to that, as Zuligans, that's what we call ourselves at Zulu Alpha Kilo, we realized in conversations that a lot of us have also experienced growing up with microaggressions and the negative impact it really had on our lives. And when we looked at ways to learn more about the topic or even how to prevent them, all that really existed out there were academic papers that could really be understood by PhDs, or articles that covered, a specific area of microaggressions, or sites that had wealth of personal lived experience shared, but there was no easy to go to, unbiased, judgment-free resource. And so based on the insight that microaggressions are so prevalent, not so much as a point of awareness, but really lack of our own self-awareness, we needed to create that first online encyclopedia to help people learn about it in a way that felt judgment-free, with tips for changing behaviors. Because really, how are we supposed to change what we don't know? And so, as a part of it, I feel like Nancy had mentioned, they're oftentimes subtle or unintentional, and we don't know when they're going to happen. They can happen when we're out with friends, they can happen in the workplace. And when stuck in that moment, what was really important to us is that, it was accessible from anywhere and any place. And so really, that's why when you see here, the landing page is not a bunch of information. It's just really simply a search field where, if you're somebody who's wondering whether you experienced a microaggression, you could type it in and find out about it and be able to point it out, versus having that burden yourself and awkwardness or uncomfortability in communicating it, or whether you're a bit embarrassed and not sure. I know I've been there. Did I say something or do something wrong or offensive? It's a way to learn about it through that way as well, and to encourage that. And then, when we think about as well, other ways to other points that I think were important is on the next slide, you'll see that actually a lot of people might have heard of the word microaggressions, but they couldn't actually talk about the definition. So we wanted to very clearly state it here, as well as have a very quick access, again, tips on how to avoid, how to respond, and how to be accountable. And then looking forward, just in terms of the pervasiveness and range of microaggressions, even when we were doing this project, again, the reason why so many communities were involved is really because of the intersectionality. As you see here, there are different ways to navigate and learn and to prevent them. Here we're representing 9 of the most, I would say, commonly documented types of microaggressions. And again, this is a way for you to yourself learn about it and read about it, and I would say an easy and accessible way. I want to say, I feel like being human, this is the most important thing. We've all made mistakes. I've made mistakes. I've been on definitely the giving end as much as I've probably been on the receiving end of microaggressions. And we wanted to just highlight 3 entries that we think could be helpful in changing the way perhaps like you think about things or behave, because it's not really what we did in the past, but I feel like really about what can we do now to make ourselves better. And so when you actually click on an entry, what you'll see here is very much in plain speak what the microaggression is. This one specifically, you see is intersectional. It touches many different communities, but you don't look like the gender, race, ethnicity, age, or religion that you're supposed to be. And when you think about this in the context of what we do as marketers in our work, sometimes when casting people for a shoot, we can be so focused on clarity of representation and diversity that we might fall into representing stereotypes when we're actually trying to portray a certain ethnicity or race. So for example, during casting or styling, if the discussion starts to go into, hey, will the audience really understand that this person is Indigenous? Do we think they look Indigenous enough? Should we style their hair differently in braids? I feel like that's when, we might want to take a step back to ensure that we're really not going down that path to reinforce such stereotypes. I'm just going to go to the next. I'm going to take a drink of water for the next entry. Another set of entries here I want to highlight is really under gender. And whether if it's someone being called Mr. Mom or being put in that scenario, or a person being described as she's so bossy, she's always so complaining, needy, or shrill, or assuming that women don't even know about cars, computers, home renters, etc. I feel like this plays a role when we're actually casting and conceptualizing spots and scenarios where I think, in order to, I would say, connect with people universally, we can default to gender roles, where women are the homemaker and nag their husbands, and men are the clumsy parents who can't really figure things out. And, as we know, this is really not reflective of the way the world is today. And so it is good to give pause and ask ourselves, whether, again, we're reinforcing these stereotypical gender roles, because again, it's not how we live today in the world today. And also internally, I know we spoke about not only I would say the output that we produce, but also, internally when assigning teams and accounts or, others to a client or project or brand, I think a watch out is, do we gravitate toward gender stereotypes there? So for example, getting men to work on car brands or sports brands or beer brands, while women are briefed on the more heartfelt family brands or topics. And so again, these are good questions to just keep on asking ourselves, to keep things in check, to see whether we are perpetuating these biases. And then just the last entry I wanted to share. As you'll see here, you're seeing 3 screens. The first one is, the name of the entry, which is inspiration porn. But then as well, what you see with each entry, if you want to dig further to gain more context of, but does this really exist in the real world, and how? You'll see there's references there and link outs, as well as resources if you want to learn more or somehow contribute to the education or supporting some of the organizations who are trying to, I would say, prevent these biases. So this last entry is regarding inspiration porn. And really, I think a big part of our jobs is to connect with people emotionally. And when we do that, I think we tend to pull on heartstrings or evoke emotions, and there might be a tendency to gravitate to the more negative traumatic stories of people. And so what you'll see here with this entry, when we talk about inspiration porn, it's really reducing that person and defining them simply by what's the disability. And so when we look on the right-hand side there, there's a New York Times article and how it's very prevalent in the world today about how Paralympians are stating, are challenging, hey, in terms of we should not be admired by, our disability and the struggles and what we had to overcome. We should be admired for all the achievements we made. And so again, it's looking at portraying people more in a positive light and looking for those instances where, again, I think we might try to fall back into familiar trappings, because I think it's what's been done in the past. So, I'm going to pass it back to Nancy to just close out this section.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Stephanie. So we know that organizations across Canada have been using the platform to increase their awareness of microaggressions. And we see that the tool has really been a helpful resource and a valuable resources for organizations to better promote and foster inclusive workplace cultures. So if you're interested in learning more about the Micropedia of Microaggressions, happy to pop the link in the chat. And otherwise, I will pass it over to our colleagues at NABS to go through some additional resources.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Louise Barabee, Director of Allocations and Services at NABS. Thank you very much for joining us today. As an organization, NABS is committed to supporting the industry with intentional inclusion through educational resources, mental health supports, personalized to marginalized communities, supporting leaders of organizations, and helping talent diversity efforts. Our goal is to use our central community position to strive for representation and inclusivity and shine a light on the positive change that is happening across Canada. Collectively, we all know we have a distance to go, and I'm struck by our industry's commitment and ongoing collaboration to help us solve shared challenges. Today's session is the second in what we hope will be an ongoing series where we learn about the current state of diversity in our industry and shine a light on some of the impactful work being done across Canada. This session follows closely on the heels of the first session we did with Publicis Media in November, where they shared some of the key findings of their extensive research study, I Am Canada, a deep dive on the newcomer's journey to Canada, expectations, and reality. Please reach out to me directly if we can collaborate and celebrate the work that your organization is doing to advance DEI in our community. I'd like to introduce you to Austin, who arrived in Canada in our industry from his home country of Nigeria. Austin sparked the need for some of the new NABS programming I will highlight in today's session. Let's hear from Austin himself.
I relocated to Canada in 2019. Took a course in Humber College and graduated during the pandemic in 2020. Getting a job in Canada as a new immigrant wasn't the easiest, and even more difficult during the pandemic until I met Louis, the Director of Allocations and Services at NABS. NABS is an organization that supports professionals in the media, marketing, and communications industry. Louise was helpful, and she hired me a personal coach who helped me articulate my experiences effectively and prepared me with coaching sessions to ensure I got a job. Meeting Trevor was a breath of fresh air. He coached me on portraying myself positively, confidently, and in alignment with the Canadian labor market expectation. Little wonder shortly after, I got a job. Thank you, Louis and Trevor, for your expertise, dedication, and passion for helping people get the right jobs.
Over the past 40 years, NABS has helped thousands of people in our industry from all corners of the globe and communities. In June of last year, as we all contemplated a post-pandemic world, NABS announced some new DEI initiatives to the industry based on some of the opportunities and trends that included a renewed focus to drive well-being and positive change for everyone, and concerted public efforts by organizations in our industry to make DEI an integral part of their organizations. NABS realized an opportunity to provide individuals and organizations with resources to continue this momentum and elevate our entire industry. Today, we will highlight 4 of those cornerstones briefly and hopefully stimulate your creativity, your curiosity enough to explore NAB's new DEI initiatives following this webinar. Everything I speak about will be sent in the post-webinar communication to everyone who registered for today's session. When put into practice effectively, DEI efforts help create stronger teams, healthier cultures, and more successful organizations. NAB's DEI Learning Hub explains the importance of DEI and outlines how to build a compelling business case for it. Available in English and French, the Learning Hub is led by LifeSpeak experts with vast experience helping leaders and employers move from a place of awareness and equip them with the tools and to advocate, lead, and become allies. NAB's Learning Hub ensures that everyone in our industry has access to a baseline of DEI knowledge, regardless of the size or scope of their organization. Last fall, following a series of presentations to international students at Humber College and in Western Canada, NABS launched their first Newcomers Employment Success Program, NESP, to 19 international students studying here in Canada. This series of workshops conducted over an 8-week period included newcomers with experience in their home country in our industry and newcomers studying in Canada. Both groups keen on securing meaningful, comparable work in Canada. NAB's NESP programming is carefully curated with our partners who are experienced in complex mental health and cultural challenges of newcomers to Canada, a diverse group of educators and experienced career coaches with a proven track record of successfully helping historically marginalized applicants succeed in our industry. We received valuable feedback and are modifying the program for the next group of participants from educational institutions. As well, we are exploring an opportunity to offer similar yet unique programming led by people in our industry with lived experience to newcomers already working in our industry who need further support to close some knowledge gaps and challenges they are experiencing. As a complement to our DEI Learning Hub, NABS developed a community DEI page on its website to host a community hub of tools and resources to further advance DEI initiatives. This content is always being updated, and we welcome any submissions from the community who'd like to be featured in this section. The Micropedia.org lives here. As we scroll through, you'll see information from POCAM, employer success tools, including considerations for onboarding and hiring of diverse staff, DEI best practices, and a new resource guide we are about to post entitled Working with Newcomers, Tips for Culturally Diverse Canadian Organizations. We've now reached the Q&A portion of our programming, and I'll turn it back to Nancy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Louise. So if any participants in the webinar have any questions, you're more than welcome to post them in the Q&A box. And I think any of the individuals, any of the panelists would be happy to answer. But while I have some of you on the line, Nadine, I'd love to turn it over to you. And I'm wondering if there's any key takeaways you have on like a best practice or a really great practice for promoting diversity and inclusion internally, so in creative teams, and then a really key takeaway for promoting inclusion and progressive portrayals externally, so in ads. So I'd love to hear your closing takeaways. Oh, apologies. You're on mute, Nadine. Thanks.
My bad, I apologize. Yes, they both straddle the same idea and concept, is that authenticity is number one. When we do campaigns, we always say, imagine who's not at the table. So when we build a campaign, we look at what does it mean? What is the tone? Like, tone is so important. What is the context and what's missing? So we pull it apart and then we see what's missing and then we add that inclusion piece. And I think the key of it is that we look around at our society and we know that we have a society that includes, if I look just on the screen today, everyone that's here is a reflection of our society. So as we do the campaign, does that include everyone at the table? And then as we go externally, it's truly the same concept, because what happens internally is what gets reflected externally. But I think the biggest takeaway that I can offer to our audience today is to have that ongoing assessment, that ongoing intentionality, that ongoing reflection. And even when we think we have perfected it, imagine what else could be missing. And as those pieces have gone out to an external audience and people weigh in and we see the culture that we live in, our audiences are weighing in, is to look at their responses and don't just sort of, hide or mute them. Muting them is some of the things that brands do, which I think is not a best practice. Truly respond and take those considerations, take those comments into serious considerations and involve them in the change as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Nadine. I'll pose the same question to Stephanie. Any key takeaways, best practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think in hearing and being a part of all this work, there are a lot of considerations, and I think it's making those considerations at every step of the process. It's just not one thing, and at the same time, not being daunted or overwhelmed by it. I feel like that's key. I think it's just trying to just be better is always a goal that I feel like I have and the teams have, and so yeah, I feel like being mindful at every stage of the process, not just the end.
Amazing. Thanks, Stephanie. So I'll pass it over to Louise for any final remarks and then to close our session out. But thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you to everyone that was able to join us today. I think we're about 82, which is amazing. And as we stated earlier, we will be sharing the recording, the decks, all kinds of resources to anyone that registered for the session, and they will be posted on everyone's websites as well. So if you ever have any questions or you'd like to partner with us to do another DEI presentation like this, please let us know. And most of all, thank you for everything that you do for our industry and for helping us learn and educate ourselves a bit better today.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.